Greetings, Whiskey Sleuths. Welcome to Whiskey Whizzle. I'm your host, Mark. Today on Whiskey Review number 87, we're going back to Canada to look at a very, very lovely Canadian whiskey, a Canadian rye whiskey, which is simply called rye in Canada. And this rye, this is called Lot 40, and it is from Corby Spirit and Wine Limited, which happens to be part owned by Pernod Ricard, in fact. Anyway, so very interesting bottle, very lovely detail on there. And as you can see, I've done quite a lot of research on that one. We'll call it research, but we know what it is. Let's get it open. Really nice having a cork on a moderately priced Canadian whiskey. This retails for about $40 in Canada. And one of the great things about it is that it just recently won Canadian Rye Whiskey of the Year for 2015. And that was only a few months ago, in fact. And that in the face of another Canadian whiskey winning World Whiskey of the Year, which will go unnamed here on the show. So the Canadian Whiskey Association, I think it's called, headed by Davin de Kergamo, who is featured here. You can see his likeness here coming through. Anyway, the panel of judges at the Canadian Whiskey Awards decided that this little number was the very best, and one-upped the one that won World Whiskey of the Year, which we won't talk about. Anyway, color-wise, we've got a very deep copper tone there, and there's no indication whether that is natural color or not. It's 43% ABV, so that's really great for a Canadian whiskey. Quite often they're 40%, so seeing some at 43 is a very, very positive thing. That was 43, wasn't it? Yes. Okay. There we are. We're going to let that air for a little bit, let it get some air, let it oxidize. But right off the hop, I will tell you that it has a nose that is to die for. Okay. So Lot 40, I mentioned, this is from Corby Wine and Spirit and Wine Limited. They make quite a few brands of Canadian whiskey, including Wiser's and another one called Graham and Worts. So watch for the reviews of those ones coming soon as well. Lot 40. Okay, sorry about all the cuts. It seems as though this is a haunted house tonight. So Lot 40, we were talking about that. Didn't really get into it very much. So let's carry on then. 1990s, Mike Booth, who was the, not the previous master distiller, but the one before that, the former master blender at Corby, he used a very old family recipe from a few generations previous in his family. There was someone who was distilling, and they had a recipe for a rye, for a Canadian whiskey. And the distillery that his forefathers had was located on a particular place known as Lot 40, in fact. And so that's, so hence the name anyway. So anyway, in the 1990s, Mike Booth, he recreated this particular malt according to the recipe, a particular Canadian whiskey, according to the recipe, and released it on the market, and it flopped, and it flopped, and it flopped. It flopped, I guess, because at this time, the tastes, global tastes, was shifting towards Scotch whiskey, and Canadian whiskey even now, but especially then, had a bit of a bad rap. Bad rep? Not a rap. It had a bad rep. Anyway, so it came and it went, and it disappeared off the shelves. Then in the 2000s, well, I guess, I don't know, sometime around maybe, let's say 2000, late 2000s, 2009, 10-ish, the current master distiller, who is Dr. Don Livermore, who is right there, receiving the prize for first place, together with the former master distiller and Booth. They collaborated. David Doyle. They collaborated and re-released Lot 40, which we see here now. Apparently, it is a little bit different, but still very, very awesome. And the cool thing about this one, in my opinion, the cool thing is that it's made with 100% rye, and a portion of that is malted rye. So it is unmalted rye plus malted rye, which is awesome. What's the result? Well, let's check that out. We'll get onto the nose now, and before that there will be a short advertisement right here. Okay, welcome back. Lot 40 Canadian Rye Whiskey, 43% ABV. Color-wise, I mentioned that already. It's a deep copper shade, and the legs are slow and drizzly. And you get a big wallop of rye right off the bat. It is kind of a dusty rye, and yet there's something like unbaked rye bread. So the dough, as after it has risen, and it's on the pan and ready to go in there, and you give that a whiff, and you'll get that hint of rye spice coming through as well. And I wrote here that it's minty, dusty rye, and there's also some fresh spring apples in there. Very lively citrus. And something that I wrote here that I think needs a bit of time before you'll notice that. It really reminds me of pine tree and grass scratch and sniff stickers. Anyway, so scratch and sniff stickers. You could probably spend an hour smelling this and not get bored. With time, which we don't have here, you will notice vanilla coming through, some cocoa, and also brown sugar. I'm not getting that quite yet. I think it needs about 10-15 minutes before you'll notice that one. Let's get on to the palate now, and a special cheers to Dr. Don Livermore and also to Davin de Kergamo and Mr. David Broom, all of whom are featured in that picture, handing the award for Best Canadian Rye Whiskey to Dr. Livermore. Okay, cheers all. Sweet and spicy right off the hop. Caramel sweetness, cinnamon spiciness, mint and other herbs like rosemary. And then you get a touch of peppery dryness that comes in, keeping that in your mouth for a little while. And what I've written here is cinnamon apple pastry, cola root beer, so cola mixed with root beer, and given time you will find, I hope you will find also, cola balls, the silver ones, and orange mint as well as licorice. Probably my favorite Canadian rye whiskey thus far. I should call that Canadian whiskey, or I should call it rye, one or the other, I think. Incredible. Now I'm pretty sure that some of this has been aged in brand new oak casks. So there's a lot of spiciness coming through, very much like a bourbon, and yet it's got the rye, and this is as much a rye as any of the big rye, straight rye brands in the U.S. The finish then, well, mint and rosemary as well as caraway seeds, spice with a hint of sugar comes through, and reminds me quite a lot of some of the dark heavy ryes that you get with caraway seeds and sunflower seeds in them. Okay, well, let's add a touch of water and see how that affects things. That wasn't very much. There we go. 3 or 4 drops. So you're not really going to reduce the ABV so much with such a small amount of water. It's probably like 41 now, 41 and a half. But what I hope happens is there will be some new flavors present and some enhancement of hopefully the best characteristics of this particular whiskey. So let's see what happens. Is it all mixed up? It appears so. Let's get onto the nose with water. Before that, we will have a very short word from our sponsors right here. Okay, welcome back. Onto the nose with water, Lot 40 Canadian whiskey, Canadian rye whiskey. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, we'll get into that in a minute. Well, it becomes much fruitier, but at the same time also a little bit buttery, in fact. And I wrote here, more sugary, and cola balls really become present even on the nose. Okay, onto the palate, onto the taste with water. Cheers all. I think that's just about right. There's a lot more sweetness now. Still well balanced between sweet and sour. Not quite as dry. And I'm getting here, this is what I wrote, mint toothpicks, and caraway also comes through. And other notes are relatively the same: orange mint and licorice, apples, apple pastry, and the cola root beer flavor. What about the finish? Try that one more time. It is a sweet, spicy, minty zinger. And very, very long. If you haven't tried this yet, if you're Canadian especially and you haven't tried this yet, for shame, go and buy a bottle today. It's not that much, and you can probably sip that slowly, maybe a glass a day or every other day, and you'll have a good month or two of enjoyment here. Enjoyment in a bottle. With friends is always best, and always drink responsibly. Okay, never overdo it. There's a point where even the the new kinds of craft drinking, we'll call it, the consumption of craft liquor and craft beer. Don't forget that too much of a good thing is not good. Whether that's broccoli or cheese, whether that is brown rice or oatmeal, there's a point where you hit the wall and you've had too much, and it's not good for your body. And the same goes with whiskey. I'm a firm believer that whiskey is a health tonic, a spiritual tonic, and a social tonic. And however, there's a limit to that. Make sure you don't cross it. Learn your limits. Okay, enough about that. Finish-wise, it's pretty much the same. I mentioned that it's quite long. Anything different there? With water, without, pretty much the same finish. It does seem, well, and that may be just in my mind, but it does seem a bit longer with water. Okay, so the WhiskyWhistle whiskey score for lot 40, lot number 40, lot number 40, single copper pot still Canadian whiskey. And that's the thing I wanted to mention. Anyway, the WhiskyWhistle whiskey score for that one is going to be 91 out of 100. And yes, a slight upgrade there. I've upgraded it time and time again. I try this and I enjoy it a lot. And again, even I'm biased a little bit towards Scotch whiskey. So, you know, now I realize, okay, this is a contender. This is a global contender. It's not just a Canadian contender. Hopefully we will see lot 40, excuse me, maybe be pit against non-age statement whiskeys from around the world, and it could very well win, I think. Okay, so 91 out of 100, that is the WhiskyWhistle whiskey score for lot 40 from Corby Spirit and Wine Limited. So that is that. Last comment, single copper pot still. So this is a very unique Canadian whiskey in that it is entirely distilled in a copper pot still rather than a column still. And that's big. Quite often for Canadian whiskeys, pot still whiskey is used as a flavoring only. So here we see it as the real McCoy itself, and I think that for Canadian whiskey, it doesn't get much more crafty than this. Even though this is a large company, I'm going to throw it out there that this is as craft as they come. Now I'm going to Canada soon, and we'll see if that can hold up that end of its bargain, that end of the bargain for me, I should say, as I try other supposedly craft Canadian whiskeys. So anyway, that's that. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. Go and get some Lot 40. Tell me what you think. If you've had it already, leave a comment. Don't forget to like the video, and please do subscribe by clicking the link right down there in the corner. Okay? Thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned for more from Whiskey Whistle. I'm your host, Mark. See you next time. Goodbye.